Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Tonight we'll be focusing on the results of the June 24th parliamentary and presidential elections, and we're joined by Soli Özel, who is a lecturer at Kadir Has University in Istanbul. Good evening, Mr. Özel. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Hello, Mr. Özel. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So,
good evening.
Welcome once again. So the ruling Justice and Development Party got 42% of the votes after the elections, while President Erdogan garnered around 52%.
I lost you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Perfect. So I'll repeat my question. The AKP received 42% of the votes during the parliamentary race, while President Erdogan garnered around 52% of the votes. What, in your opinion, does this tell us about the relationship between the ruling AKP and its base, both in terms of the party and Erdogan as a leader?
Well, we have to combine the ruling AKPs. I think it's about 42%, and the president's 52.5%. The difference is about 10 points. And Mr. Erdogan's partner in the parliamentary election, the MHP, the Nationalist Party, which has not fielded a candidate, received about 11%. So I think it is not totally illogical to surmise that the MHP guys have voted for their own party, but when it came to the presidency, they decided to vote for Mr. Erdogan, who was the candidate, the joint candidate of the two partners. Secondly, there is also enough indication that many of those, and since nobody expected MHP to actually get 11%, the 5, 6, 7% that was the difference between what the polls indicated and what the MHP got is assumed to have come mainly from the AKP. That is, AKP has a fluid constituency of maybe 5 to 6% who can vote depending on the occasion or depending on the time, either for AKP or the MHP. And this time around, they seem to have chosen to vote for MHP. And finally, and this is, of course, more about the MHP than AKP, but in the Southeast, the MHP had done well. That's also where the AKP used to do much better than it did this time.
So you started talking about the MHP, which we'll come to in a minute, but before we do that, let's focus on the main opposition, CHP, now for a while. The results of these elections seem to have produced a new fault line within the CHP, as their presidential candidate, Muharrem İnce, İnce ended the race with more votes than his party, the CHP. What should we expect for the future of the CHP under these circumstances?
Well, it is always very difficult to talk about the future of CHP because the CHP seems to be eternal, stagnant and eternal. And it is true that Mr. İnce, unexpectedly, I must add, established a very energetic link to the general public, and perhaps if the campaign was to last a bit longer, maybe it could have reached out to even more parts of society and maybe dig into AKP's voters, but that didn't really happen. And the CHP basically remained along in the vicinity of where it usually gets its votes. Its maximum vote was about 25%. This time around, they got about 22%. They lost some to the new party, E Party, but at the end of the day, yes, they have not done as well as their candidate. That tells us something about, I guess, the party, which doesn't grow, and a candidate that, in this particular case, proved to be, to the surprise of a rather capable political actor.
Mr. Özel, I think we lost you there. Can you hear me right now?
I hear you, yes.
Perfect, we're back. So I'll continue with my next question now. Let's get back to the MHP, which you started talking about a minute ago. The overall vote share of the MHP seems to be one of the perhaps the oddest outcomes of June 24th. As you said a minute ago, most pollsters predicted that the party would remain below the 10% election threshold, while it managed to receive around 11% of the votes. And it did so without even running a proper election campaign. How would you explain this riddle?
Well, I guess a lot of people are scratching their heads and trying to figure that out. Part of it is actually pretty obvious that those that can go between AKP and MHP and chose the AKP on the 1st of November 2015 elections went back to where they were. But the real mystery is how come the votes of the MHP have increased considerably in certain provinces of the southeast where the majority are Kurdish. Some suggest that maybe the increase in the number of security forces and their families could account for that, but I guess we will have to wait for a more proper analysis. But no matter which way you look at it, the MHP vote is quite a mystery and a miracle, kind of. Nobody has foreseen it, and that was, to my mind, the most interesting and the biggest surprise of these elections.
So let's get to the other opposition party now, which is the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, HDP. They were seen as one of the central players in the parliamentary elections, as their passing of the 10% election threshold would determine, would have an impact on the number of seats that the AKP would receive in the parliament. So what do you think, and how would you evaluate the HDP's performance in the elections, and not only HDP but also Selahattin Demirtaş's performance as a presidential candidate?
Well, I'll start with the presidential candidate. It must be, I don't know of any other, I don't know of any precedent in the world whereby the presidential candidate of a legal political party would run his campaign from jail, and I must say that that has been a pretty imaginative campaign as well, and he was aided wonderfully by his wife. Mr. Demirtaş received about 8.5% of the vote, and that is about what he received in 2014, 9.8% to the best of my recollection. So in that sense, he actually maintained his votes. And as I said, this in spite of the fact that he was not allowed to campaign because he was in jail. The HDP, as you correctly said, was the key party in this. The reason being, most of the polls and most of the commentators believed that the opposition in general would have a chance to hold the majority in the parliament, and therefore get the chance of maybe be a balancer to the executive, which will be very powerful in the new system if the HDP crossed the threshold. In the event the HDP did cross the threshold and the opposition did okay, but contrary to what the expectations were, because of MHP's strong showing, the opposition did not manage to get the majority in parliament. Therefore, to a certain extent, I mean, HDP's presence is obviously very important, but the fact that it's in the parliament did not suffice to make sure that the parliament could actually become a seat of a countervailing power to the executive presidency. In that sense, its role has been slightly reduced, but still, it's important that it's there.
Mm-hmm. And finally, let's end by talking about Meral Akşener and her newly formed Good Party. So the party secured 43 seats in the parliament, while Meral Akşener herself, as a presidential candidate, remained at a mere 7%. How do you evaluate these results and the performance of Akşener and her party?
Well, she actually encountered a near total blackout. The president, Mr. Erdogan, acknowledged Mr. İnce but totally ignored Mrs. Akşener. The screens of major television stations, except on 2 occasions, were not open to her. The media virtually did not give her any cover whatsoever, certainly not the official media. So under those circumstances, I find her performance quite respectable. Obviously, the party had a very high opinion of what it could achieve, but 11% is way below what they were thinking, over 20% for themselves. But I find that given the media blackout, given that they were very new and they only had very little time to prepare, 10% for a newly formed party is still to be reckoned with, and I suppose that they would have a potential to grow in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Özel.
You're most welcome.
For
have a nice
joining
evening.
us
Bye-bye.
tonight. So our guest tonight was Soli Özel from Kadir Has University in Istanbul, who commented on the outcome of Sunday's historical vote. And now we'll continue with our next news video.
Official results from Turkey's presidential elections show incumbent Recep Tayyip Erdoğan with a commanding lead, paving him the way to govern with a set of new constitutional authorities. Erdoğan received 52.6% of the vote in the presidential election on June 24th, enough for him to win outright and avoid a runoff election, the Supreme Board of Elections announced. His challenger, Muharrem İnce, was in second place with nearly 30.7% of the vote. İnce, a 54-year-old former physics teacher, has wooed crowds with an unexpectedly engaging campaign and received around 8 percentage points more than his party, the main opposition Republican People's Party, CHP, which received 22.7%. The Nationalist Movement Party, which allied with the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, for both parliamentary and presidential elections on June 24th, beat forecasts of almost all pollsters by keeping its votes at around 11%. The MHP achieved 49 seats in the new 600-member parliament. The pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, HDP's jailed candidate Selahattin Demirtas was hovering at around 8%. Demirtas had to run his campaign from prison, where he is being held in pre-trial detention on terror-related charges. Meanwhile, the HDP managed to get more than 10% of the votes, passing the national election threshold and received 67 seats in the parliament. The party has dominated the polls in southeastern provinces, winning more than 65% of the votes in its strongholds, Diyarbakır, Şırnak and Hakkari. It also generated over 10% support in Istanbul, the Aegean province of Izmir, and the southern provinces of Mersin, Adana and Hatay. Former Interior Minister Meral Akşener, the only female presidential candidate in the race, also challenged Erdoğan with 7.4% of votes nationwide. She broke away from Turkey's main nationalist party, the MHP, over its support for Erdoğan and formed the center-right Nationalist Good Party. The vote took place under a state of emergency declared after the failed coup attempt of July 2016. Erdoğan was seeking re-election for a 5-year term with hugely increased powers under the new system, which the AKP claims will bring prosperity and stability to the country. These elections were originally scheduled for November 2019, but were brought forward after a call by MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli and then endorsed by the ruling party as well. Sunday's vote ushers in a powerful new executive presidency long sought by Erdoğan. He was prime minister for 11 years before becoming president in 2014.
In a press conference after the June 24th elections, main opposition Republican People's Party, CHP's presidential candidate Muharrem İnce underlined that he intends to continue his political fight.
People's Party CHP's presidential candidate Muharrem İnce, who came second in the presidential race, held a press conference on Monday at 12 p.m., a day after the elections. There is no significant difference between the official ballot reports that our officials have shown us and the numbers announced by the Supreme Board of Elections, İnce said in a statement, addressing the opposition supporters that were suspicious of the voting process after the Adil Seçim platform was shut down. Adil Seçim platform, or the Fair Election Platform in English, is an initiative led by the main opposition CHP to track polling clerks and election results. The Adil Seçim website went through a shutdown at around 8 p.m. on the election night, and took about 45 minutes to start functioning again. After the website went online again, the results that were shared on the website were in accordance with those announced by the state-run Anadolu agency. Following earlier statements made by both İnce and the CHP that they would carefully monitor and inspect the security of the voting process, the Adil Seçim confusion raised questions among the opposition supporters after the election night. After President Erdogan declared his unofficial victory on national television and the Adil Seçim website lost its legitimacy amongst the opposition supporters, opposition voters voiced demands on social media for an immediate statement from the CHP and İnce. However, both parties remained silent while a journalist from Fox TV announced live on television that he had received a text from İnce saying that Erdogan had won the race. During his press conference on Monday, İnce underlined that he had lost an unjust election race and vowed to continue his political fight. İnce also said that the votes he garnered during the presidential race had surpassed those of the CHP as a party for the first time in 41 years. When asked if he would run for CHP chairman once again, İnce explained that he did not want to talk about inter-party. On the other hand, CHP's chairman Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu faced multiple calls from within his party to resign from his post after the June 24th elections. While many have expected Kılıçdaroğlu to resign from his position, he has defended himself and his party by saying that the only loser of the elections was the ruling AKP. They lost 7 points thanks to our party's efforts, Kılıçdaroğlu said in a press conference, vowing to keep a strong opposition in the new parliament to demolish the rest of the wall in the March 2019 local elections. Kılıçdaroğlu and his administration are now under strong criticism by the younger CHP supporters, who staged a protest in front of the party's headquarters in Ankara.
Nationalist Movement Party, MHP, the ruling AKP's partner in the People's Alliance, exceeded most expectations and won 11.1% of the votes, securing 48 seats in the parliament.
In the parliamentary elections on June 24th, AKP's coalition partner in the People's Alliance, Nationalist Movement Party, MHP, exceeded all expectations and won 11.1% of the votes, securing 48 seats in the parliament. When compared with the results of the November 2015 elections, MHP increased its votes in 45 provinces, including the eastern and southeastern provinces of Turkey, which are known to be predominantly Kurdish-populated cities. Following the establishment of Meral Akşener's Good Party, political analysts had suggested that Good Party would attract MHP's votes and that the MHP would remain significantly below its November 2015 vote share of 11.9%. Indeed, all polls had predicted that the MHP could not reach the 10% parliamentary threshold. During the campaign process, MHP endorsed AKP's leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan for president and held only 3 rallies. In the final days of the campaign, MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli criticized the AKP's parliamentary candidates for trying to steal his party's voters. With its 11.1% vote share in the elections, MHP became the 4th largest party in the parliament, following the AKP, CHP and the HDP. The People's Alliance won the majority with a 53.7% vote share. Following the elections, the MHP deputy chairman Mustafa Kalaycı reported that his party will support the ruling AKP's candidate in the upcoming election of parliamentary chairmanship. Meanwhile, MHP chairman Devlet Bahçeli has dismissed his party's newly elected MP Sefer Aycan, who had said that Bahçeli saved Erdogan and that the MHP will be able to do whatever it wants in the new parliament.
Now we'll have a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Will close my eyes.
Organized by the Istanbul Culture and Arts Foundation and sponsored by Garanti Bank, the Istanbul Jazz Festival kicked off this Tuesday and is celebrating its 25th anniversary in 2018. Famous double bassist, cellist and jazz composer Dave Holland will meet Indian percussionist Zakir Hussain tonight for an unforgettable performance at Zorlu PSM. Elkanor Quartet will be in the concert at the Seat, the beautiful concert hall of the Sakıp Sabancı Museum on the banks of the Bosphorus. Oğur is a Turkish musician and a pioneer of fretless guitars, who is known for inventing the first guitar without fret in 1976. His composition combining the sounds of Turkish folk music and classical music with old traditional tunes has influenced many musicians. Istanbul's 16th Pride March is set to take place on July 1st, but even as it is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex community and supporters prepare to celebrate next week, it's unclear whether they will be free to do so. The meeting point is in front of the French Institute on İstiklal Street at 6 p.m. The Istanbul Governor's Office has banned the Pride March since 2015. due to the state of emergency, citing security concerns and the need to uphold public order. Nevertheless, in recent years, some people have tried to gather in spite of the bans, and the police has responded harshly, using excessive force to arrest and disperse participants.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.